All right, so let's get into that State of the Nation chat, and I want to introduce my two guests that I have joining me on set tonight. On my immediate left is Dr. Wandia Njoya, who is a lecturer and a blogger. Many thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
And on the other side is Marilyn Kamuru, who is a lawyer and also a consultant on matters governance and gender issues. Many thanks, ladies, for joining us tonight. So there seems to be a lot of confusion in the space that we are at as a country right now in terms of electioneering and politics. But let's just first talk about the judiciary and the Supreme Court, which is at the center of the stage we are at right now. And some people would be of the argument that we have come very far as a country and as an institution of the judiciary in a sense that people have a lot of trust in it now. What is your feeling towards this?
I am also very positive, and I actually am excited that Kenya has been able to put its stamp on democracy in the world by the Supreme Court ruling. So I'm excited about it. I think the backlash is very unfortunate, and it's almost like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. In terms of Kenya making its mark in world history. Yeah.
And Marilyn, we've seen the political attacks, particularly on the Supreme Court. And just after that August 8th elections, and when that presidential election announcement and results was announced by the IEBC, Jubilee telling NASA if they have any queries, they should go to the Supreme Court, and then they went to the Supreme Court, and now Jubilee does not trust the Supreme Court. What do you feel about this? And as Kenyans, are we just consuming these things without questioning?
Well, I think, we have to remember this is the second time that we've gone to the Supreme Court on a presidential petition. So there is a remarkable degree of progress for us as a nation. We're putting more and more faith in our institutions. I think it's expected that politicians will behave badly.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's surprising. I think what I would really like us as a country to be focusing on is look at how Kenyans are behaving. Look at the leadership that's being demonstrated by Kenyans. So when we're hearing this antagonism and this, feedback from politicians, instead Kenyans are going about their business. We were all unsettled by this decision. I don't know anyone who expected it. But we are showing that, okay, this is a process, this is democracy, and we are demonstrating that leadership. So I think what we're starting to see is a maturity also in the Kenyan electorate.
Right.
That for me is particularly exciting. Yeah.
All right. And we saw that petition to oust the Chief Justice, which has since been withdrawn. But just to take a look at that, and should it have been, let's talk about the security of tenure, for the judges at the Supreme Court. And of course, this would be a matter that would then have had to be admitted by the Judicial Service Commission. And some questions arose with regard to the composition of that commission in the first place, that perhaps it's inclined towards, the support of the incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta. I don't know what you feel about that.
I think it's unfortunate that we have gone towards the tribal way of analyzing this whole situation, because when Justice Maraga read the ruling, he was reading it as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Kenya. So for the politicians to degrade it to the level of this is your son, and then we'll attack your son, but when we need your votes, we are going to now apologize and say we are human, I think that's very unfortunate. When Maraga spoke, he spoke in the name of Kenya, and we should accept it as such. And so even just threatening to use the commission to remove him is very unfortunate. And I'm just hoping that this is just politicking, but it is really putting a dent in the way we accept the functioning of our institutions. Yeah.
Right. And Marilyn, one thing that has kept coming in this discourse is the issue of timelines, strict timelines that the Supreme Court has had, you know, to even deliberate on these issues, to give the full judgment. And as we speak, even as we count down to that re-election, the IEBC says they cannot really conduct any reforms without that full judgment. So the whole question of timelines then comes into focus. What are your thoughts about then what needs to be done about this?
Well, I certainly want to agree with you about the petition. And by the way, I really encourage all Kenyans to read that petition. It is, Mr. Wambugu has a future as a fiction writer. It is like a political thriller. You know, I mean, it alleges everything. I think the only two institutions that weren't mentioned, you know, in most political thrillers are the CIA and Illuminati. I mean, it's amazing.
But all the other characters are there.
All the other characters are there, you know. So it's really a great work of fiction. The timelines are very strict. I think IEBC is being disingenuous because if you, and they did participate in this process, they were deeply involved in this process, things like the scrutiny and the issues that the judges had and the questions that they asked gave very clear pointers. So for instance, we had, you know, Justice Philomena talk about, you know, tell me about stray ballots. Tell me if, you know, we have 6 votes, what happened to the extra ballots? So some of those issues go to, well, this will just be a straight presidential election. They explain some of the issues around the processes and the number of ballots. Right? Because we also know they had extra ballots. So how do you account for that? We know we had issues with ICT. There were clear issues with ICT. We were talking about, you know, IP addresses, the KIMS system, you know, where were the GPS locations. So I think IEBC is being disingenuous, saying that they can't really make some reforms. There are things they could do. And what I think as Kenyans we should be demanding of IEBC is show us what you're doing now. Right, as we wait for the judgment. Because the judges were quite clear. There was a significant amount of material. There was not enough time for them to review it all. 14 days is a really short amount of time. I think we're all cognizant of the fact that that's probably going to be one of the things we need to change. So I think IEBC really needs to demonstrate some good faith by saying, these are some of the issues that we think after having participated, we can address, and this is how we're going to address them.
All right.
And one of those, in my view, has to be the stepping aside of some of the members of the Secretariat.
Yeah, because that then brings into question, if we are going to do this re-election with a body that, you know, its conduct was brought to question with this ruling, but we are going with the same composition of the Secretariat, the same everything. What changes then in this re-election is a question, Dr. Wandia.
And yeah, and I agree, there really is no change, but I think what I find more disturbing is that they're ignoring the voice of the people and the doubts that we have. Because it's not enough just for the process to be done, but to be seen to be done properly.
Right.
And even before this case went to the Supreme Court, Kenyans were already raising doubts about how the process had been followed. So, you know, we are always being told about the will of the people and the voice of the people. The will of the people is to have an election that reflects the rules that we set out in the Constitution and that reflects our voices. And so far, the IEBC seems to be playing around with that and not taking our voices very seriously. And incidentally, that's what I said even before August 8th. I said they're not inspiring confidence, and yet the ultimate judge of the election is not even the Supreme Court. It's us, the people.
Right.
If we feel that this election is not credible, then it will be us, the ultimate judge. And what the Supreme Court simply did was to voice what we, the people, had already been saying.
Right. And Marilyn, do you think the people are being given enough space to even question? And I saw that the IEBC is inviting NASA and Jubilee for a meeting next week. And there was the question of then the people also have questions to ask. Yeah? What is
and I found that really interesting because I thought, you know, one of the one of the things that I think was really exciting about this process this time around was, you know, there were Kenyans from very odd places who started asking questions very early on around many of the issues that ended up being the basis of the litigation. Right. So they were spotted by ordinary Kenyans basically just conducting their civic duty. So I'm surprised that IEBC does not think that it is important to engage some of the people who said, listen, you know, we had an issue with this. And it's not engaging so that people can tell you what you did wrong. It's engaging so that people can also get clarity on, oh, is that why that happens like that? You know, so I think there's a sense in which there's an antagonistic relationship with the electorate. And as Dr. Wandia says, we're the ultimate judge, and we are the most critical participants in this process. So it would behoove them to spend a little more time maybe. I mean, there are lots of ways to engage. They can do Twitter chats. They don't have to have, you know, a meeting at Bomas or at Kasarani, you know, or they can even just ask for, you know, public participation. You know, what's the feedback? What is it that you found you had issues with? They won't be able to address all of those things, of course. But what that does is, again, it inspires confidence. And that's really what we need to do. We have to build trust in these institutions, because we can run an election and then none of us believe the outcome. So where will we be at that point?
Right. And let's talk about NASA and its demands. Saying that should, you know, some of the officials not go, should some of the things they're asking for not happen, that they then will boycott, you know, that re-election. And what does this mean? Does this mean that then President Uhuru Kenyatta just walks into State House? Does it mean that we can, those people who want to vote for Raila Odinga can vote for him in absentia? What kind of scenarios are we looking at with this, you know, threat of boycott?
Wow, I'm not in politics.
If anyone knows.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'm not in politics, so I really don't know what they are calculating. But I see their point, which is that we can't trust an election with the same guys running the election, which is fair. What I don't know is how that plays politically, but it just means, for one, that if Uhuru still marches into State House, that he will not be considered legitimate as the legitimate head of state. And the thing is, you know, already there was a crisis of confidence with his presidency, even from 2013, and we spent the last 4 years trying to build Kenyans' confidence, and just, I mean, now it has gone back down even lower than it was before. So I don't know how he wants to rule when there's no confidence in his mandate. Although, you know, that's not a surprise when you come to Africa.
That's your personal opinion,
but that's
Dr.
my personal opinion and opinion of a few observers. But I think that's a political question, which I think the political parties and NASA in particular would be better placed to answer. I'm just a voter. I'll just see how it goes.
Well, I actually would suggest it's a legal question, and I think NASA is probably being, in my view, a little foolish about the approach. The election has been gazetted.
Right.
There was a Supreme Court ruling, and they were the beneficiaries of that ruling.
Absolutely.
So they also can't do what Jubilee has done, which is when it behooves you, they're wonderful. When it doesn't, they're not. They have some credible requests. I mean, think about it. This country, we've actually had cabinet secretaries step aside, suspended, resign, you know. So this is not unusual. Cabinet secretaries of a much higher standing, they're in the executive. There is no basis on which I see that we can't have members of this secretariat step aside for the greater good of this country. That does not mean an admission of guilt. Right. It's simply, again, going back to the timelines.
That's something we hardly see here, people just willingly stepping aside when they are, you know, in the middle of...
And that's why I think what we really should be asking as Kenyans is, listen, we're not saying that, because legally we can't change commissioners within this time. We really can't. And the returning officer for the presidential election is the chairman of IEBC.
Right.
So that's not going to change. And from what I heard, we obviously will need to read the ruling very carefully. I didn't hear a finding against the returning officer. I heard a finding against IEBC, the body. So what I would suggest, because what we're really trying to say is, listen, can we find a middle ground that allows us to move ahead as a country? And if that middle ground is, can we have some key people from the Secretariat step aside while we talk about some of the other procedural things that we need to change, so that we all agree to this election on the 17th, then I think that that's something that we should discuss. And we shouldn't sort of have sacred cows, especially since the Secretariat is not protected in the same constitutional manner that commissioners are.
Right. And I know we wanted to, we had a soundbite that, I don't know if we're able to play it, that leads into the next discussion about the tribal card, which seems to be one that is really, you know, here with us to stay. So I don't know if you have that soundbite to play.
Musione ya kwamba wale wengi wamenyamaza, ati mufikirie hatuna nguvu. Yeah? I want to be very clear. Musifikirie ya kwamba tumenyamaza, because we are the silent majority. But that does not mean we are going to take everything they are going to shove down our throat. No. We want you. It is your job. You have been given 60 days by the court. Deliver an election. And we are willing to accept the verdict of the people.
All right. That was President Uhuru Kenyatta speaking yesterday in Sagana. It's not the tribal one. I guess we'll get that one next. And he said, I'm just going to try to paraphrase, saying that all these demands that NASA have, you know, that Jubilee members are the silent majority, you know, in both the houses, and NASA then the loud minority, that then just because they've not been speaking does not mean that, you know, they don't have a voice, and that should NASA, you know, try to stop the election on October 17th, that they're jeopardizing the lives of Kenyans. And so the question was, what are we supposed to read into that kind of comments from the head of states?
I think it's so unfortunate the way the president has been behaving since the Supreme Court ruling. First of all, I don't like the stereotype that he has been playing between Jubilee, the quiet, hardworking party, and NASA, the noise-making, you know, doing nothing party, because it's playing onto tribal stereotypes, and these are stereotypes that have been being built since the Kibaki administration, which is so wrong. I think there's always a space for people to discuss the processes and how they want them done, and to name such people as noisemakers is very unfortunate. And also, he needs to decide whether he's speaking as a candidate or as the president of the Republic of Kenya. Because if he's the president, he's supposed to be talking on behalf of all of us, including the people who did not vote for him. So for him to always be being the Jubilee mouthpiece and he's talking from State House, that's not right, and it's not fair to the other Kenyans who did not vote for him. So I don't think he's behaving very presidential, and I think it's very unfortunate, and he needs to cool down, probably take a few days off, and really just calm down and think about the whole of Kenya and not just himself, but also to threaten chaos, and he's the president. Is that a promise, or he's just predicting? I mean, it's just so disturbing, and we don't expect this kind of talk from him.
But how is it, or how possible is it to, you know, be putting on those different hats, the presidential one and the candidate one, and to know when to put down the other? Because in this period, you are one and the same thing at the same time.
But I think, you know, it's a very important point, and it's a subtlety that that is the obligation of the person who holds the office of the presidency right now. So I think that he does have a more significant obligation to bring us together as a nation, and that's a bit of a challenge. However, I also think that one of the big mistakes we have right now is that we are playing personality politics again. This is the office of the presidency that we're talking about. It's an office. You know, in all honesty, President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga are not the only people who are inconvenienced by this election. A lot of us are living a very difficult, longer electoral period than we anticipated. And so I think both the politicians have a lot to learn about who is really affected here and paying attention to the 40 million plus Kenyans who have been really inconvenienced. But I think it's also the media. What are we choosing to amplify? You know, whose stories are we choosing to tell? Who are the people who drive Kenya? Because what I'm seeing is regular Kenyans choosing democratic space, not happy, but choosing to believe these institutions. But the story that we keep hearing amplified is of people in positional authority who are then just pushing the tribal card or just pushing division. So I think, you know, even the media has to take a step back and say, okay, wait a second, is this really the whole
what agenda
story?
are you setting?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
All right. And just talking about the tribal card, in the past 2 days, I think we've seen this really magnified in that political space. We saw you know, the Kisses saying that they're standing behind Chief Justice, you know, David Maraga in light of that petition to oust him. And, you know, some people were saying he's not a Kisses, well, he is a Kissie, but he's Chief Justice, that's his label. And, you know, I don't know, what do you feel about this? And we've seen tribal delegations going to State House, whatever that is ever about. Are we always going to be about the tribal, you know, vibe, so to speak?
I think we will always be tribal as long as we let politicians set the tone for our political discussions. We are not allowing political discussions outside of politics. And I always give the example of the doctor strike, where you had a very political issue, which was our health care. And it still always went back to the politicians. There wasn't enough focus on the doctors. And in fact, politicians started to get scared that here you have a group of people acting politically, but not along tribal lines. And this has been the history of Kenya, of shutting down any political spaces that are not tribal, so that in the end we are left with actually Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta. That is the product of our political system. And also the way we educate. We are not educating Kenyans to think broadly and abstractly. And I'm talking like this as a teacher, that we don't educate Kenyans to be able to abstract the issues, so that you're not just seeing the person, but you're also seeing in what context is he speaking, in which institution, and what are the implications. We still don't know how to analyze politics that way, but as I said, it's also a product of the media and also political games that any non-political political groups are non-tribal political groups are always clamped down very hard by the political class. So that is why we are still talking about just personalities and tribes. And I think it's very, very unfortunate that, okay, sorry, first let me backtrack. About Kisii seeing the Chief Justice as a tribe. Well, you know, Uhuru opened that door when he was campaigning before the elections, and he said, you see, we've appointed your son. So that set the stage. He wasn't talking about, oh, you know, I have boosted our institutions, I have respected the Constitution. He went and talked about the appointment of a particular person to an office. So that set the conversation, and now people are just picking it up because they are saying, you brought it up, so now we are going to continue with it, and we're going to see the Chief Justice as our son rather than as the Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya. So politicians are the ones who are setting the tones for these debates. And unfortunately, we as ordinary Kenyans, we need to improve our skills at telling politicians we're not going down that road.
Right. Marilyn, what's your take on this tribal stance?
I actually think that it's not anywhere near as effective as it used to be. It's starting to diminish in importance. And I think the reason for that is, again, one of the reasons that Kenyans have or are choosing to have faith in institutions is because what other option is there?
Right.
You know,
Right.
I think one of the reasons why we should be, if I were a politician, I'd be very concerned is if Kenyans are this okay, it means that they've basically decided whoever is elected, whether it's Uhuru Kenyatta or Raila Odinga, their issues remain. So I'd be very worried if I was a politician because there's an ambivalence there from the electorate.
Kind of, you know, laissez-faire kind of mentality.
Yeah, I think it's also Kenyans starting to say, we see it. We may not be able to change it, but we see it. You know, and the other thing I keep insisting about tribe, so who are these tribes people? And by the way, actually, let me call them people because they're always men. They're tribes men. So the whole discussion of tribe also renders women completely invisible. You know, the majority of the citizens of this democracy, and we are a democracy, a constitutional democracy, are rendered invisible every time we discuss tribe.
Right.
And I think that's deliberate. I think it's a way to disempower women. It's an attempt to keep the influence and power within a very small minority, generally older men, you know. So I think that one of the things that we should be looking at as Kenyans, young people, you know, people from marginalized communities, is how does this discussion advance anything for you, you know? Because you're locked out of it. You're never going to be an elder. Well, none of us sitting here will ever be an elder of any tribe. I can guarantee you that in Kenya. So when that's a space that's locked out for you, why would you want to continue having a conversation like that? And so I think you're seeing Kenyans pull back a little bit. It's happening, but I think many more people are seeing it. They might not be able to fully articulate it, but I think they're starting to see it for the charade that it is.
A growing consciousness of, you know, you want to choose your own thought processes and, you know.
Or maybe it's just me being optimistic. But yeah.
All right, and how dangerous is this power struggle as we see it now in the Kenyan space? Because on social media, we are seeing a lot of hate speech. You know, sometimes I even look on my timelines and I can hardly even identify some of the people that you see them post some things and you like for 5 seconds are shocked that this politics is becoming more and more divisive, even to people who are educated, and you would expect to not think along those lines. So how dangerous are we seeing this struggle? Is it trickling down to the people?
Wow, I don't know about the people, but from me, my experience of social media has been pretty good. I am so encouraged by the number of Kenyans who are seeing the issues broadly and not just personalizing them. I am particularly amused by people calling KOT the best observer, election observer group. And I agree, they were better than all the election observers we got. So I think it depends on who you're listening to.
Yes.
There is a good group of Kenyans, and I think there are many who are actually analyzing the issue broadly and, you know, with sobriety. It's just that they are not getting enough airtime.
Especially, they're really great minds on that
platform.
And
I mean, they've made New York Times and John Kerry back down. I think that's heads up to KOT. So I think we are doing well. And also, you know, with the bots that have been paid to infiltrate, especially Twitter, you can't really tell how many of these people are real and how many are fake. Like, I've blocked so many people. And some of them, it's obvious that they are not real people. They've just been paid. It's just paid accounts. So I think social media is not a good gauge of where the people are. But I am really impressed by the Kenyans who are keeping this government on toes across ethnic groups. And I wish there would be more airtime about them. You know, before the election, I was really hopeful. In fact, someone saw me and I was telling her, I really, really have great hope in this election because I see that the Kenyans I see these days are not the Kenyans I saw 10 years ago We have a more sophisticated group of young people who are really interested in this country, and I think they are doing great work until the world is noticing. Yeah.
Fantastic. And from a legal standpoint, Marilyn, maybe, because many people have been asking, the Jubilee Party is now faulting the Supreme Court, saying they have no trust in it and whatnot. So should they have any queries or any qualms with the results of the re-election? What kind of scenario then would we be looking at?
They'd be going to court. We'd all be urging them to go to court. I think the truth of the matter is that we also need to remember that we're dealing with human beings. And they're doing the, kicking and screaming because they didn't get what they wanted. What we are asking, though, is show some leadership, demonstrate that you are acting in the interests of the nation. I think we need to start asking them to start with the end in mind. Article 10 of our Constitution is very clear about the values and principles. Accountability, rule of law, national unity. So some of these things are really just about Jubilee saying, you know what, yeah, we don't like this decision. However, we need to understand that this institution is just as important as ours as the executive. And if we undermine the judiciary, we are simultaneously undermining the executive and the legislature. So where are we all going as a country? And if we start with the end in mind, I think we'll start to see a little more retreat, because it's self-interested retreat. Because if you're going to win that position, you're going to need people to respect that arm of government. And if you're working to actually undermine the respect and that trust, you're actually working against your own interests. So I'm optimistic.
Okay. We're just about to wind up. So, Dr. Andia, maybe I'll have your final thoughts. What do you think Kenyans need to be thinking about now? What questions should we be asking? What should we be demanding, in our space, in our democratic space right now?
I think the most important thing for me is respect. Respect for we, the people. Because behind the Constitution, it is us. And we expect politicians to talk like we are human beings, we wananchi, whether we earn a lot of money or not. We would like politicians to talk like we matter and like our votes matter, because that was actually the question about this election. Were our voices respected when we cast ballots? And the way it looks, regardless of who you listen to, it's clear that our voices were not respected. So we want to be respected as we the people. And I urge Kenyans to think of that first, to think of themselves as human beings and to think of what do institutions that respect us look like? How do they sound like? So far, we haven't been hearing some statesmanship or stateswomanship, respect for us. Politicians talk as if this is a brawl between the two sides. No, it's about us. And the second thing is respect for institutions. The reason we have institutions is so that society can be orderly. So for the head of state who is occupying an institution to start bashing another institution, that's not a good sign. And we Kenyans, we the people, we need these institutions to work, because if we are personality-based and tribes-based, it's gonna, we are going to have conflict. So we need the institutions to be respected. For me, I just want to feel that I have dignity. And so far, I feel I've been treated, especially since August 8, I've been treated like I don't matter, that my voice doesn't matter. And even when it's confirmed that my vote wasn't treated well, I'm still being bombarded with rhetoric. I think that's not fair. And we just need some respect and dignity, and we want politicians to remember that.
Okay. Marilyn, your last thoughts on the state of the nation, on what Kenyans need to be thinking about, what we need to be, which institutions we need to be put into check?
I think Kenyans need to be looking at themselves, and they need to be looking at leadership where they are, not with people who are holding positional authority. What we're seeing is that the electorate is leading Kenya right now. Kenya is peaceful because we have chosen that we're going to watch this play out, that we're not going to listen to the rhetoric on either side that is divisive. So I think, for me, I want Kenyans to continue to trust themselves.
Right.
We are here because we had a post-election crisis in 2007 and 8 that led to a new constitution. We can't keep precipitating crises. What's going to happen next? We'll have another constitution that we then violate. So I think Kenyans are actually saying, no, we're not. We've been down that road. We have a constitution. Everybody roll back, come back. So I see a lot of leadership from ordinary Kenyans, and I would actually want to see the media highlighting that.
Right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be sharing, you know, a platform with brilliant women. Dr. Wandia Njoya, who is a lecturer and blogger, and Marilyn Kamuru, who is a lawyer and a consultant on gender issues and governance. Many thanks for joining us, ladies.
Thank you.
And that is where we wrap up this edition of KTN Weekend Prime. Many thanks for watching. My name is Sharon Momanyi. Do have a splendid night and a great weekend ahead. God bless.